Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to the arena. How's your day? How's your day? How's your day? Today we're gonna talk about we're gonna talk a little bit more about the basics of Magic: The Gathering. These tips will probably mean more to players new to the game than my usual audience, but just stick around and maybe you'll have a few pointers to add in the comments section down below. So anyway, I'm no stranger to card games, and I've been playing different. Well, I am new to Magic. I've only been playing the game for what 6 months, maybe, but I have been playing card games ever since I was a kid, and I've started playing with Pokemon Card, the Pokemon trading card game. And then oddly, I moved on to the Harry Potter card game, and for a long time I stopped because card games can be quite expensive, especially the physical ones. I mean, digital card games like Hearthstone are in their own respect quite expensive, time consuming, in the same way that Magic: The Gathering Arena is. But if you've never played the physical card games like paper Magic or paper Pokemon trading card game, it can be very very expensive, and as a kid you don't really have access to all that money unless your parents are very generous and you're a very good kid. Then so anyway, then came digital card games like Hearthstone and other games like Gwent, the Elder Scrolls, what's it called, Legends, and then it opened up a new path of opportunities for my love of the cards. So anyway, at the beginning, it's moving forward, everything can be a little bit overwhelming. Just like any other card game, there's keywords, there's creatures to understand, there's mechanics, and there's the finer details of the meaning of those mechanics and loopholes to certain strategies. However, right now you're probably most concerned about how what kind of deck you're going to build, and as a beginner it'll probably take a few tries before you actually get it right. And building should really be all about expressing yourself to your opponent. When you pilot a deck, sometimes a player may play it differently than how most players will. And by the way, pilot in this context basically just means to use or play an already made deck, usually made by the pros. These decks are usually meta decks, meaning that they are really good. They have high win rates. They have really good card synergy in there. We'll talk about that later, and we'll talk about piloting um, in a different video. So luckily, when you create a new account in Magic, you're given a set of cards, a set of decks. These are beginner decks, starter decks, and uh, if playing these decks are usually the best way to learn the cards, what they do, and there are a lot of cards. Like there are a lot. So uh, most decks will have a theme for their archetype. In Hearthstone, it was classes, because it was World of Warcraft themed, and like in Hearthstone they had the priest deck, they had the mage deck, the warrior deck. In Magic, however, we have colors, and each color has its respective playstyle or characteristic, which um, to some players they take it quite personal. Some even believe that your choice of colors actually determine what kind of personality you have and how you portray it. So which color to choose really depends on what you're going for and how you want to achieve your win condition, how you want to express yourself to your opponent. So to start, I'm going to skip the part about mana and land and how that all that works, since most of you watching this just want to learn how to make a deck, a balanced deck from scratch, and most of you probably already know how mana works in MTG, so or in any card game for that matter. So red decks are probably going to be your entry level decks. Red cards in Magic tend to have straightforward mechanics. They have spells that can deal a lot of damage and creatures that can attack immediately when they enter on the battlefield, because they have that keyword haste. In a game where your goal is to simply reduce your opponent's health to 0, these cards are fairly simple and easy to execute. So just cast your spells, summon creatures, and deal damage to your opponent as fast as you can. So let's go ahead and take a look at this red deck right here. All right, so you'll notice that most of the red decks contain cards like Fanatical Firebrand, which has haste, or spells like Lightning Strike that deals a lot of damage. 3 damage may not seem like a lot, but multiply that by 4 because you have 4 of them in your deck. Plus add that to all the other damage dealing stuff that you have. It kind of all just adds up really big, really big. So we have Scampering Scorcher, which allows your tokens. It creates two 1/1 red tokens, and they have haste. So Legion Warboss is here too, which allows you to just continuously create creatures on the board. And there's Light Up the Stage, which allows you to draw, just to keep you fueling your it's a draw card. It's a draw ability that can be casted for either 3 or for its keyword Spectacle, which if you've dealt damage to your opponent, you can cast the card for 1 mana, for 1 red mana, and you get to draw cards. You get to play it if you have the mana to. It's just a means to be able to continue to fuel the fire, as mono red is themed as fire. And so there you have it. You have a lot of red cards in here that are very powerful, very strong in the early game, but in the late game, mono red decks don't really survive that long. They're kind of weak when it comes to the sort of mid-range gameplay. So if you find yourself facing turn 10 and you're nowhere near winning the game, let's say your opponent still has like 15 health, then you're probably losing already, and your opponent is probably already stabilizing in terms of their strategy. Now, most mono red decks will contain 20 land, which is arguably few, and as a basic rule, you want something like 20 to 24, maybe even 26 lands in your deck, because you want to be able to draw cards. You want at least half of your deck, something like half or a third of your deck, to be comprised of land. So in Magic the Gathering, you have a total of 60 cards in your deck, and so you want 20, because that's around 1/3. But that also depends on your mana curve, which is a completely different topic, which we'll talk about in a different video. For now, we just want to talk about the basics of deck building, which is, so you're gonna need land for a mono red. You're probably gonna need 20, because you're gonna play aggro, and the cost of your cards aren't really that expensive, because they're 1 cost or 2 cost. As far as 4 is probably a 4 to cast card is probably your most expensive card that you're gonna have in your deck if you're playing mono red. But this is a very meta deck right here, and it's you probably won't even know what cards are good to play, and it takes a lot of experience, actually. So you just kind of gonna have you're gonna have to sort of have fun with your deck building experience. But to start you off, these, for at least for the current core set, which is Magic 2020 or core set M20, these are going to be the cards that you want to have, most likely. But you can always like switch up. Like you can remove a few, maybe take out 2 Scampering Scorchers and change it. Maybe put in, since you have Chandra, you can put in 2 of these Chandra's Regulator, which is a legendary artifact, and it will supplement or complement rather Chandra Acolyte Flame, in the sense that every time you use an ability of this card, it'll trigger twice if you pay for 1 mana. All right, so moving on, we're gonna talk. We've dealt with mono red, which is very aggro, very quick, fast paced. We'll move on to Stompy, mono green. We'll talk about the what these names mean, or how you name your decks, what terminologies are for. So here we have a very green deck, which is mono green, and we'll probably end it here with after we explain how to build a mono green deck, because these are considered to be the most basic and the easiest deck archetypes to build with, to play with, to and they're very easy, they're very straightforward, they're very easy to understand. So mono green cards, mono green decks, the green cards in general, there we go. The green cards in general they contain a lot of big creatures, and creatures that are kind of hard to deal with, like this Vinemare, which has hexproof, which is another keyword that you will encounter in your journey to play Magic the Gathering. Hexproof is basically, there are different kinds of hexproof, but hexproof on this particular creature is immunity, or, well, your opponent can't target your creature with spells, or destroy spells, or remove spells, or bounce spells, which bounce, by the way, just means that they put it back either in your hand or in your library. And so we have Steel Leaf Champion here, is also a big, very cheap card, but this card is rotating out, so we don't really know what's going to replace it. Probably, chances are it's probably going to be this Barkhide Troll, or something along those lines. So the green cards also hold creatures that give you more mana. If you've played Hearthstone, they're pretty similar to how the Druid deck works, where the Druid allows you to gain mana faster as the game progresses. And in this situation, since the mana mechanics are very different for MTG and Hearthstone, in this situation, the creatures, as long as they're on the board, they will provide you with additional mana for every turn. They reset every time. So, but that is to say, if you use mana, you have to tap it, or they're used. You can't use them to attack. You can either use them to attack or to gain mana. So this deck is pretty advanced for the mono green. So let's get rid of this deck, because it has a lot of like Planeswalkers, and Vivian has a lot of Planeswalkers. It has sort of strange creatures in there that don't really fit the mono green Stompy category, but at least not the traditional sense of mono green Stompy, but the essence is there. It's still considered to be Stompy. By Stompy, what we mean is they're big creatures, big cards. So if for instance, if they say, oh wow, that's very stompy. So you have a Thrashing Brontodon, which has 3/4 because they're big. A Steel Leaf Champion, they have 5 power for durability. That's pretty big, as opposed to other creatures that are maybe, let's say, this Paradise Druid isn't very stompy because it only has 2 and 1, 2 power and 1 life. It's easy to be dealt with, but Paradise Druid is actually kind of a exception to that easy to deal with mechanic, because the card does have hexproof, which makes it a little bit harder to remove. You're gonna have to use some very specific removal cards to get rid of this this creature, or you're gonna have to wait until your opponent uses the mana or makes the druid attack before, because the hexproof is conditional on the druid, on the Paradise Druid, wherein she only has hexproof as long as she is untapped. Untapped in this situation in Magic means they're unused, or in that sense they're used. Untapped means they're used. Tapped. Wait, hold on. Yeah, untapped means that they're unused, and tapped means that they are used. So we're gonna start from scratch here, just so that you can see how the process works for a mono green stompy. So let's say oftentimes when you're playing mono green stompy, you're probably ramping up to some strong card, some strong creature that you want. Maybe you want let's say Carnage Tyrant, which also has hexproof and can't be countered because creatures can be countered. So it's a very big card, so normally you only want 3 or 2 of those, maybe 3 or 2, because realistically if you put 4, well, I mean, you can put 4 if you plan on having multiple Carnage Tyrants on the board and you want to use Carnage Tyrant as your main win condition, so you can do that. So for just for this deck, we can do that. Now if you notice, the game has already suggested 24 land. Our mono red earlier had 20, but actually in reality we can afford to go a little bit lower with this mono green deck that we're gonna build, because as I said earlier, the green cards hold a lot of these sort of creatures. So these creatures that have mana or give or provide us with mana. So we can probably put in a Llanowar Elf in there. 4 is the maximum, by the way, for any single card. So we'll put a Llanowar Elf in there that gives us a 1 mana. We can probably add in this Leafkin Druid, or well, hold on, no, maybe not. So there are a lot of choices, and you have to consider the current meta and what kind of decks that you'll be going up against. So a lot of this current meta has a lot of removals, and so I think I'm gonna put in that Paradise Druid as we saw earlier, so that we guarantee that we have sort of a hex-proof creature that gives us mana, and we can continue with that ramp that we want. Then there's the Incubation Druid. We can put that in as well, but so because it provides us with mana as well, so we can put in 4 of those. Additionally, I think there's a card that comes to mind. It's called Gift of Paradise. Oops. Okay, no. Okay, it's an enchantment, of course, so we can put in 4 of those. So this is gonna give us a lot of mana, and it's gonna allow us to almost guarantee that we can ramp into a Carnage Tyrant. 23, 24 land is going to be good for a creature heavy deck, as it's called, depending on how your mana curve is going. Let's see. Well, we're gonna need more bigger creatures, and I'm thinking we can probably add in a Thrashing Brontodon. This is very basic. So you want, if you're going creature heavy, obviously your opponent may not go the same route. Your opponent may probably have a lot of enchantments, like for instance, a Gift of Paradise. They may have a lot of enchantments that will make it difficult for you to play, or will allow them to gain the advantage. So you want creatures that can deal with those kind of enchantments or artifacts. And then of course you're gonna want your win con is going to want to be something. We can include this Steel Leaf Champion, even though it is rotating out in the next set, because Steel Leaf Champion is a pretty good card to have. It is 3 mana to cost. It's very cheap. You can put down multiple cards of those. With that being said, now that I think of it, I think it's too much mana. So you have to consider that too. If you're putting in too many mana and not enough creatures that will bring you to your win con, to the end game. How about we include a few of these shifting Ceratops, maybe just 2, to sort of because it has protection from blue, and the blue cards can be quite a pain. They can remove your creatures and all that. There is one card that I do want to. So this is deck building for best of 1. So you kind of want to have a general amount of cards that will help you sort of defeat almost any deck type that you come across, because it's a lot easier for best of 3, where you can sideboard, which we can talk about later, and I don't want to discuss it right now because you might get overwhelmed. But basically, sideboarding means that you can put some cards into your sideboard. That's why it's called a side. And on the side, you can put some cards on the side. Let's say this Ward Scale Crocodile, and then in best of 3, you can sort of in between matches, if you lost the match, if you won the match, and you've already seen how your opponent plays, what kind of deck they've got, your sideboard is supposed to sort of be like a counter, so you can substitute some cards into your main board. This is your main board right here. There is one Veil of Summer, I think. Veil of Summer. Here we go. So since we are playing best of 1, we do want a good amount of, sort of a shotgun approach to how we want to play the game, because we don't want to go up against a black deck, or a deck that we're weak against, and not have anything just to answer to whatever they play. So we want to be able to we want to have a fighting chance, is basically what we want, even though we're up against a deck that our deck is weak against. How about we add in a Crawl Harpooner, maybe just 2, just in case we. Oh wait, no, I don't think that's necessary anymore, since we do have shifting Ceratops. So another thing to consider is the current meta includes a lot of flying creatures, and if you kind of forget about that, your ground creatures aren't going to be able to attack the flying creatures. So you need ground creatures that have the keyword reach, and can, well, basically reach for those flying creatures. Likewise, you can also include spells that allow you to deal with flying creatures. So you can have Rabid Bite, maybe. You can put in 2, just as a just in case, or we can put in 3, I suppose. What else? What else do I want in here? Oh, okay, hold on. So Planeswalkers. As you saw earlier, Planeswalkers are kind of like your general, your leaders of the deck. but they're not really a necessity in any deck. You can win perfectly well without one of these in your deck, but if you can synergize them into your deck and your cards, synergize them with your cards to work really really well, they can actually be really game breaking. So how about um, for this general kind of deck, I think I want maybe to have two of these Vivian Reed. So I'm going into this, putting these cards into it, knowing that I already know what the card does. But for you, you probably won't know what the card does, and you're gonna probably have to read a lot of these, these cards. It's gonna take you some time before you can actually sort of cover all of the cards in that are available to you, and make use of them to however suits your playstyle. So we can probably put in 2 or 3 of these. How many land do we have? 23. We do have a lot of, I think. I feel safe. The nice thing about Gift of Paradise is if you go up against the mono red, the very aggro, very fast-paced deck that we were talking about earlier, Gift of Paradise allows us to sort of heal for 3. So it buys us a little bit more time just in case, because it gets crazy when you're up against mono red. Because usually by turn 3, by turn 4, they've already won the game, and you're still setting up. So you kind of want some form of heal to help you sort of survive. So we still have 2 cards. What else can we put down? I think for our deck that we're building right here is it's going to be very creature heavy. So we want the planeswalkers to be sort of complementary to our creatures. I think we can probably take one of these Gift of Paradise out. Remove a Thrashing Brontodon. So deck building also requires a lot of imagination. So you're trying right now, as I'm thinking, how many cards of each do I need? I'm already sort of imagining how my battles are going to play out. Now let's see. What else do we want in there that can help us sort of broaden our win condition? I guess we can put in. Oh, I know. It's another expensive card, but that just means that we're gonna have to add in another forest. Yeah, so we're gonna need 24 so that we can assure ourselves that we actually grab into it. There is a Ronus, God Eternal. Now Ronus, in general, the God Eternal cards are very hard to deal with. They're 5 to cast, which isn't a lot to ask. But now that I realize it might be a little bit too much, but okay. We could put in maybe 2. Yeah, 2. Because so God Eternal Ronus isn't a win con, but in those cases where sometimes, because Carnage Tyrant, Shifting Triceratops, Steel Leaf Champion, all of these are enough for you to win the game, especially if you successfully put down Vivian Arcbow Ranger, or if you successfully put down either one of these 2 planeswalkers on the board and you manage to protect them by any means possible. You can already achieve a win in that manner. But having God Eternal Ronus early or maybe late in the game can, if he comes out early and you can put him down on the board, he can change the tide of the game, because he's very hard to deal with. If your opponent decides to destroy him, you can always put him back into your deck at the 3rd from the top. and at the same time, it has death touch. So any creature that tries to make contact with this God Eternal will die, regardless of how powerful, of how big they are, unless of course they have death touch. Because then death touch, rather, unless they have indestructible, because indestructible makes them immune to being destroyed by any means possible. So you can only destroy cards that have creatures that have indestructible keyword by exiling them, which is another keyword, another removal form, or by health reduction, which is another form of removal. But we will talk about that in a different video, or you can experiment with it on your own. So we have, I think we have enough. We just need one more to kind of nail it in. I think we want 3. I think it'll be good to have 3 shifting Ceratops. There. Okay, here we go. There. So this is a very well balanced deck right here. It's probably not the best. The win rate is probably something at 50-ish to 45% win rate, but it is, for a beginner deck, it is very good. It is also very expensive, considering that we have 3 Vivians. Since we have a lot of Vivians and we have a lot of but that's actually part of the game. Most of the reasons why you will win is because you have really powerful and rare cards like Eternal God Eternal Ronus, Vivian Reed, Vivian Arcbow Ranger, and Carnage Tyrant. Also shifting Ceratops. But mostly because you're going to be able to play them, they have a really good synergy between the cards. And so yeah, this is actually a pretty good mono green Stompy. I would love to test this deck out, but actually we still have to teach you how to deck build for mono red. What? Oh, okay. Well, oh yeah, okay. We included. Yeah, we'll talk about that some other time. Because it was warning me about because Vivian Arcbow Ranger, although it is a very nice card, ultimately you want to be able to make use of its. It has most of the time you'll be using it for its +1, which allows you to distribute 2 1/1 counters among up to 2 target creatures, which means that you can either target 1 creature and put 2 token counters on them. So for instance, if it's this Thrashing Brontodon, it'll turn into a 5/6 5 power 6 health creature. But if let's say you have 2 creatures on the board and you want to distribute this +1 to both of them, so let's say the Paradise Druid and the Thrashing Brontodon, your Paradise Druid will turn into a 3 power 2 health creature, and your Thrashing Brontodon will turn into a 4 power 5 life creature. So it's a very powerful card, this Vivian, plus that -3 loyalty, which allows you to target any creature you control and deal damage equal to its power to a target creature. So that means, let's say I have this Thrashing Brontodon, it has 3 power, I use the -3 ability, so it does that. This Thrashing Brontodon will do 3 damage to any creature on the board, without the repercussions of a combat going on between them, because when 2 creatures come into contact, they usually someone's gonna die, or someone may not die, or maybe both won't die, but some damage will be traded off. With this -3 ability, you get to remove that negative aspect of that combat, and you kind of make it one-sided in your favor. So you basically get to deal 3 damage of any creature that you have on the board to any creature that your opponent has. All right. So we were talking about the ultimate. We call these ultimates, these -5, the last ability on a planeswalker. We call them ultimates. So the -8 on the Vivian Reed, the -5 on the Vivian Arcbow Ranger. Now the Vivian Arcbow Ranger allows you to go into to search for a card outside of the game. Now this is a little tricky and this is a little advanced for you, for a beginner. Now outside of the game basically just means your sideboard. Remember what we were talking about earlier in best of 3? Well, I think Wizards of the Coast, the creators of the game, are starting to explore that idea of being able to use the sideboard in best of 1 matches, wherein previously the sideboard was mainly used for best of 3 matches. So I think that's a good move for Magic the Gathering. I think they're going in a right direction for that. But of course, I also believe that it shouldn't be accessible to all of the deck types. So having it on this mono green is actually pretty good lore wise in terms of the story and how Vivian sort of, because Vivian in terms of story, she's got this arc bow that can summon creatures every time she throws her arrow from her bow, and it's very in tune with how her lore is, how her lore works, how her character in the Magic the Gathering stories work, and I think it's very cool. So anyway, we're moving on to we're gonna create a mono red deck that is very basic. So most of the time you're going to see like cards like Fanatic of Firebrand in there. Normally you only want 20 mountains because a lot of the mono red cards don't really cost a lot. They're very cheap. They're only 1 to cast, and they're very cheap cards. So normally you're going to want to have, for the current meta, I might build a similar deck to what I showed you earlier, but we might go a little different route. So okay, having Shock is pretty much a staple card for any mono red deck, including the Lightning Strike. Now I'm gonna go for a more traditional approach to this mono red deck, since we have so Electrostatic Field. What that does is whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Electrostatic Field deals 1 damage to each opponent. So that's an additional 1 damage to your opponent's health, to their face. Alright, so I think we want Dreadhorde, or well, Dreadhorde is this Arcanist. You may cast target instant or sorcery card with converted mana cost. Its power. No, I don't think I want that. Alright, so here we'll have the Steamkin. The Steamkin is a very powerful card as well, in that every time you put you cast a red spell, meaning either it's a creature or an instant spell or a sorcery spell, your Runaway Steamkin will gain +1/+1 up to 3, up to an additional 3 +1/+1s, and then you can remove those counters to gain mana. So what is that other Skewer the Skewer? So we're gonna include this, Skewer the Critics. And how about we have Lava Runner? Then we can also include Wizard. Well, oh no, we want the Viashino, obviously. And then here it is, Wizard's Lightning. what else do I want in here? Oh, hold on. Light up the stage is also nice. We saw this earlier when I were showing you the deck. So there, that's an even 60 cards. And this mono red deck is strong in that sense, and it's very aggressive in that sense that there are a lot of spells. So if you get to put down the electrostatic field on the board and you just cast whatever spells you want, any instant or sorcery spells that you want, it'll deal an additional 1 damage to your opponent. And having creatures that have the wizard keyword for, or subtype for of the creatures, like this Gitu Lava Runner or the Viashina Pyromancer, having that keyword will allow us to cast on the board. If they're on the board, it will allow us to cast this Wizard's Lightning for 2 less. So by default, it costs 3. But if we have, let's say, a Viashino Pyromancer on the board, we can cast it for 1, which is a very cheap. Cast it for a discount. It's a very cheap way to win the to win the game, as mono red is always very cheap. Is a very cheap way to win the game. And then Skewer the Critics and Light Up the Stage have that spectacle keyword, where if we've been able to deal damage, 1 damage to our opponent, at least 1, we can play the card at a discount. So by default, these 2 cards cost 3, but because we have several ways to deal damage to our opponent, more often than not, and more likely that we'll be able to cast them for their 1 cost ability. But then that is to say that this deck does sort of run out of a lot of steam. So how about we take out maybe 1 electrostatic field, maybe 1 the Wizard's Lightning, and include, what do we want? Okay, so here's their Experimental Frenzy. Oops, Experimental Frenzy. No, I think for this deck, Experimental Frenzy will be perfect. I was thinking of another card called Chandra, the Fire Artisan, which basically serves the same purpose, except that since a lot of decks in the meta right now have counters for Chandra. I mean, Planeswalkers aren't that hard to deal with. You can either use a removal spell or a damage spell, like for instance this shock. You can use maybe 2 shocks on a single Chandra and get rid of that 4 health. The loyalty points, which we will find at this area right here, is equal to the health of your Planeswalker. And if that goes down to 0, then your Planeswalker sort of dies. It goes into the bin. And that's why loyalty the loyalty abilities have +1 or -7. And in order for you to use their ultimate, which is that -7 or -5, whatever it costs, you want to make sure that you have enough loyalty points on your Planeswalker so that it will survive, unless of course the situation calls that if you use it and it's fine, because even if your Planeswalker dies, then you probably might be winning the game already. But sometimes you do want your Planeswalker to survive after using the ultimate. And well, okay, we were talking about Experimental Frenzy and how it was sort of similar to Chandra Fire Artisan, but Planeswalkers are easy to be dealt with because they can be damaged by either spells, creatures, or whatnot. You can have removal spells like Destroy. There are some cards out there that have Destroy Planeswalker, while Experimental Frenzy is an enchantment which is very, very specific, and there aren't a lot of removal cards out there that can deal with the enchantment. Well, I mean, there are a lot, but there aren't a lot that are being included in the current meta. So having enchantments is a good way to gain the advantage, because you're more or less your opponent won't be able to do anything about it, because more or less they're playing meta decks, and more or less they won't have removals for your enchantment. So with that being said, I think that wraps it up for this sort of basic tips, basic lessons on how to build your deck in Magic the Gathering. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope is learning what the learning process was fun. I hope it was fun. So I'll see you guys in the next video. We'll be talking about mono black and mono blue. So I'll see you guys there.